Just waiting for our attendees to log in. I think we'll just give people an extra minute. Takes time to connect.
Are we connecting?
We are connected. We are recording. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. So, good afternoon. Librarian Maria Racina here at the Cote-Saint-Luc Public Library. Welcome to today's virtual book launch in honor of Jewish Heritage Month. Today, we have the pleasure of launching Daddy's Remains by internationally acclaimed local memoirist and author Sharon Nadja Zajdman. In fact, we had Sharon with us before for her previous book, which was written about her mother, Renata. I Want You to Be Free. And this book is about her father. So we're actually going to begin with a reading from the book, and then we will continue with an interview. So for the moment, I am going to launch a PowerPoint, which will show you some of what Sharon will be speaking about for us. Go ahead, Sharon.
Some people can't go home again. Inspired by Mom's example, in the spring of 1978, Daddy returned to Radom. We were together in Warsaw, Mom, Daddy, and me. Daddy hired a private driver. He refused to let us accompany him. He had the driver take him to Radom and told him to return in 2 hours. By the time the driver came to collect Daddy, he was already waiting. Mom had to respect Daddy's wishes, but she took her exclusion hard. Taking a break from Mom's high anxiety, I hid in our room at the Hotel Forum. Mom tramped around Warsaw until a nasty encounter blasted her back. She flew through the door and exploded. Sacre cholera, they haven't changed. I knew my cue. Okay, Ma, what happened? I was on a tram. I fell into conversation with an elderly lady. She was elegantly dressed, as elegant as it's possible for a Warsaw woman to be these days. I could tell that she was cultured and had known better times. She might have known my mother. Mom sank into a hardback chair next to a bureau. And we talked about Warsaw before the war. I told her I left in 1943 and live in Canada now. She complimented me on how well I speak Polish. I know I speak a high Polish. Mom's mother tongues were Polish and Russian simultaneously. She didn't grow up speaking Yiddish, which is one of the factors that saved her life. Mom learned the smattering of Yiddish she knew from Dad. Heaving one of her heart-rending sighs, Mom pushed herself to conclude her narrative. We talked about the tragedy of the war and Warsaw's takeover by the Soviets. Then that bitch found a silver lining. At least this aristocratic-looking lady felt free to tell me. Hitler did us one favor. He rid us of the dregs and the Jews. I gasped. I couldn't imagine anyone in Canada admitting to such a sentiment. I was still young and naive. Gówno. Mom kicked a nearby garbage can. Shit! To Mom, Polish and English were interchangeable. They are the dregs, those bloody anti-Semites. They haven't changed. Oh, why didn't Daddy let us go with him? In my presence, Mom referred to Daddy by his title rather than by his name. He shouldn't face that town alone. I should have insisted. Mom could be as overbearing as she was well-intentioned. No, you shouldn't have. I stuck up for my dad. That's the way he wanted it, Mom. Perhaps he was afraid he might break down and didn't want us to see it. He'll be back soon, Mom. Daddy will be okay. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Daddy entered the room. Mom detonated. Well, Daddy was intensely white. He sat on the edge of one of the beds and lowered his head, searching for the words to convey what he felt. There's not much to tell. He shook his lowered head. There wasn't much to see. The place where we lived is still there. The windows is broken. It's shabby, neglected, dust, dirt, hungry cats looking for food in the garbage. It's not my home, it's a ghost town. So saying, Daddy shook as if to shake off the ghosts lurking behind his eyes. Let's get out of this room, let's go outside. I need air. In the hallway of the hotel forum, a small trolley rested outside a neighboring room. It was filled with soiled dishes and glasses and cutlery. Daddy smirked at Mum. A warning glint lit up behind his warm, dark eyes. This time, Mum matched Daddy in mischief. Without a word passing between them, they grabbed hold of the handlebars on each side of the trolley, wheeled it to the elevator, waited nonchalantly for the elevator to arrive at our floor and for its doors to open, and then shoved in the trolley. While Mum stood guard, Daddy stepped into the elevator and pressed each button on the panel so that the conveyance with its cargo would stop on each floor. Daddy stepped out and, wiping his hands in a gesture of good riddance, sent the trolley on its way. For a moment, my parents stood stone-faced. Then they fell into each other's arms in wild and silent laughter. That is so childish, I scolded my parents. I could not yet fathom the extent of their rage at their homeland. An infantile thing to do. My parents' response was to keep laughing, even laughing out loud. Oh, sweetheart, you're such a square. Ruefully, Mum queried Daddy. How did people like us produce such an old lady? Daddy knew better. They didn't make her Kohana. She was given to us. He gazed at me tenderly. I always melted in the warmth of my father's gaze. This is not an old lady, Daddy corrected Mum and pronounced with finality. This young lady is an old soul.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That was wonderful. Okay, so now we'll move on to the interview portion. So Sharon will be interviewed today by Dr. Pamela Keevil. Dr. Keevil began her professional life as a teacher and in the latter part of her career served as a head teacher or principal. In 2016, she completed a master's degree in creative and critical writing. She has won several awards in her native England for her short stories. Since 2018, she has published 4 novels. In 2020, Pamela was a critical reader with a press in Manchester, which published Sharon's first book, The Memory Keeper. Sharon contacted Pamela, asking her to critique a manuscript which would later become I Want You to Be Free. Graciously, Pamela accepted the assignment. After reading the manuscript, she wrote, "When this is published, I will be the first to buy a copy." When the book came out 18 months later, Pamela kept her word. A year later, Sharon approached Pamela again, this time with a novel. After reading an early version, Pamela promised to see Sharon through every draft of the book. Since then, these two authors have supported each other through their trials and triumphs, all from across the ocean. Pamela joins us from her home in Gloucestershire. Pamela, take it away.
Thank you, Maria. So, Sharon, first of all, what inspired you or motivated you to write the memoir of your father after the publication of your mother's memoir?
Though they were accepted a year apart, my first book, The Memory Keeper, and the memoir of my mum were published within the same month. And you can imagine the work involved. I felt as if I'd given birth to twins. After these publications, I suffered a form of postpartum depression. 2 months later, I was seriously injured in an accident which was waiting to happen. It happened during the period of what is my father's death anniversary, his birthday, and Passover. For years, I've wanted to rip April out of the calendar, and in 2022, I succeeded beyond my worst nightmare. During the long and bleak period of recuperation and rehab, I set myself a project. I gathered all the writing I'd done on my dad and decided to see where it would take me. I followed the writing and let it take me where it wanted to go. It was a way of reconnecting with my dad. I didn't expect the results to be published, but I didn't rule it out.
Now, the title is intriguing, Daddy's Remains, but it's the subtitle that's also interesting. A woman in search of her dead father finds herself. I'd like to know why you thought that you needed this subtitle.
The subtitle came to me after I finished. It was only after I finished that I realized what I had produced. Conversely, the title announced itself instantly. I was searching for a way into my father's story. I was having a hard time finding the key. I couldn't tell my father's story in the same way I told my mother's story, nor would I have wanted to. I latched onto the detail that Daddy was buried twice, hence Daddy's remains. As I followed the writing, that detail became the central metaphor. Daddy's remains is a work of legacy.
You've adopted a very interesting structure with the introduction and chapter 1 leading us away from a more linear timescale. Why was this?
Well, it's interesting that you picked up on this. What serves as the introduction was originally in the middle of the book. It begins, I was expected to be a Christmas baby. On Christmas morning of 2022, I was still in bed, not fully awake, when an inner voice whispered, "Move this chapter to the beginning of the book. Make it the opening." The subconscious is a helpful writing partner. I trust what comes to me in such a state. Often writing problems are solved in dreams. There are times when I go to bed feeling stuck over a piece of writing and deliberately ask for an answer. By morning, the answer will come. So now, the book begins at a pivotal moment in my father's life and then flashes back like a film. I can't give you a logical explanation for this, but it seems to have worked.
So many of the stories about your father's life have lessons, and I'm thinking in particular of the one about the friend who refused his help and the subsequent learning that we all need to know how to give and receive help. What other anecdotes contain advice that would be helpful today?
Well, he preached it, but he had a hard time practicing it. For Dad, it really was better to give than to receive. He abhorred any form of dependence. He poured a lot into my brother and me, but there is one piece of advice he drummed into me, which became my mantra. What you have in your head, no one can take away. After my mother died at the end of 2013, I put myself to work, and by the time the pandemic hit, I was ready. In June of 2020, The Memory Keeper was accepted for publication. In June of 2021, I Want You to Be Free was accepted for publication. In June, in June of 2021, I Want You to Be Free was accepted for publication. And in June of 2023, this book was accepted for publication. I had a good pandemic.
I think you might be one of the few people who did.
Oh.
Throughout the narrative, you weave the story of your family, and not just your father's life, but with events that had an impact or were happening. Yet it doesn't feel like a history book. How did you get that balance?
During the editing process of I Want You to Be Free, I had this debate with the publisher. Of course, one must supply context, but how much and how little? My rule is anything that disrupts the narrative must be kept out. I learned this from the bad example of other writers. I've read memoirs where the author veers off the storyline and launches into a history lecture. I find this not only annoying, but patronizing. Never underestimate the audience. If there is historical background, which a reader may not be familiar with, you can always look it up. If the reader doesn't know and isn't interested, then this kind of book may not be for him.
Now, I know that your mother left many notebooks and other evidence to support the writing of her memoir. Where did you get the information about your father's background?
Well, my mother left a treasure trove of recordings on both cassette and DVD. A series of her film testimonies can be found on the website of the Shoah Foundation. She also wrote a memoir, which she intended to be used as a reference for her children and grandchildren. In this memoir, she not only wrote about her relationship with my dad, but she also made notes on his wartime experiences, which he had shared with her. As I began writing and going through photographs and documents, I came across copies of documents Mom accessed in the 1990s in archives in my dad's hometown. It was like walking through a cemetery, which I like to do. I like social history. Not only were there listings and bios of my father's siblings and ancestors, but my mother had the foresight to translate her findings into English in red ink by hand. When I found these documents, my ancestors came alive for me, and I hope they will come alive for readers of this book.
Now, for me, a central theme of the book is the power of love. This is a love story of a man for his wife and his family and their love for him. What made your father so lovable?
Oh, his warmth, his wit, his awesome generosity, his playfulness, and his joie de vivre. Even his anger, which stemmed from a fierce sense of justice. Oh, he was beautiful when he was angry. He had a natural empathy for children, which they responded to. He would have made a wonderful teacher. He was a wonderful teacher. When my brother was in a program for doctors learning to teach doctors, he was asked, "Who's the best teacher you ever had?" Without hesitation, he responded, "My father."
The subtitle suggests that this was as much a quest for you. What have you discovered about yourself?
Through the research and writing of this book, I rediscovered my dad and learned to appreciate him in a new and mature way. I am now older than he was when he died. I can see myself through his eyes. I can see what he saw in me. I can see why he worried about me. He recognized that I had what he called his character, his nature. He would say to me with his pronounced streak of irony, "There are 3 things wrong with you. You're too sensitive, too intelligent, and too honest. Being daddy in a woman's body is a double whammy.
This book is now part of your father's legacy to the world. What would he have to say about that? And what would he have wanted his legacy to be?
I've been wondering about my dad's reaction to this book ever since it was accepted for publication. I think he'd have mixed emotions about being thrust into what he called the limelight, though he would be unconditionally proud of me. Dad called me, as we heard, an old soul and a gift, who he believed was sent here for a reason. He believed I was destined to do something special and become known for something. He prophesied, you will go through the hard part now, and then you will wind up on top, just like me. As for his legacy, he left a son who has saved countless lives at birth. My brother became a pediatrician and neonatal care specialist. He too has an affinity with little people. Dad didn't live to see Michael finish medical school, but he knew that he was going to. And he left me. To know that I am at peace would give him satisfaction and a sense that his life was a success. As for affinity with little people, they had an affinity with him too, and it seems they still do. A few days ago, here in the library, I noticed a little boy with his mother stopping in front of a display case where the mock-up of the book cover has been placed. He pointed up to my father's image and said, "What's that?" I was behind him. I said, "That is me and my dad." The little boy was confused. Of course, his mother thought he was joking. When I explained the situation, his mother took a picture of the poster. So Abram's legacy continues.
And finally, after these 3 books, what is next for Sharon, the author?
My debut novel has been accepted for publication.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you both so much. Now, Sharon, you will be speaking to some images, which I will project onto the screen now.
Let me see. Here she is. The young, well, either Sorelaya or Saralea. This would be the Yiddish version. This is what they would have called her. My brother discovered this photograph of our paternal grandmother during a trip to Australia when he was 18. Relatives gave him a copy. He had it enlarged and framed and then presented it to our father. Confronted with this image of his long dead mother, Daddy broke down. There he is. This on the left, this is the only extant photograph of my paternal grandfather. He died early enough to be afforded the dignity of a private grave. Now, in the next one, Miha, that was his name, also had the traditional memorial stone. Though he died a natural death during a period of peace, it was his stone which would come under siege during a desecration of Jewish graves. I write about it in the book. Here, Abram and the brother he was closest to are standing by the stone with Buba Charna, who was Sorelaya's mother. Buba Charna was not a cuddly grandmother. After her daughter was prematurely widowed, She stomped over to the Zajdman residence, spat at her grandchildren, and cursed, "Parasites, ingrates. A mother can care for 7 children, but 7 children cannot care for one mother." Then she hauled her daughter home. In 1942, at the end of August, when the Germans came, 80-year-old Bubachana refused to get on the train. Standing defiantly in her doorway, she railed at German soldiers as she had railed at her grandchildren. "I don't need to get on the train in order to be killed," she dared them. "If you're going to kill me, you can do it right now." They shot her on the spot. This beautiful young woman was Michal and Sarah's eldest, Zelda. She was born in 1901. Here, she is pictured with her husband, Oleg. Zelda and Oleg had a son, Jerzy, known as Jurek, who was born in 1923. Abram's first nephew was only 6 years his junior. When Abram was on the verge of escaping into the Soviet Union, Jurek pleaded with his young uncle to take him along. Abram refused. The teenager was physically unfit. Abram felt he wasn't strong enough to withstand what he rightly anticipated would be the physical and emotional hardships of exile. "You're too soft," he told his nephew. "You stay with your parents." Jurek never left his parents. On July 22nd, 1942, in a forest outside Kovel, he was shot with them into a pit which would become a mass grave. Post-war, learning the manner of his nephew's murder, Abram blamed himself. It was misplaced guilt he would carry for the rest of his life. This is a group photograph of Hashomer Hatzair youth. I recognize my dad, circled, head in the back, and my uncle, down in the front, but the rest are unknown to me. When I look at this photograph, I wonder how many of these earnest youngsters realized their dream of making Aliyah. I also wonder how many of them didn't. Okay. On the back of the originals of these photographs is the name of the photography studio where they were developed, as well as its location. Kazimierz on the Vistula. Kazimierz was Michal's hometown, and the Vistula is a river. Did the Zajdman tribe have relatives in Kazimierz? I don't know. I recognize 2 of the young women. I see my father's sister, Sesha, and his sister-in-law, Regina. Sesha survived Auschwitz and outlived them all. Regina survived in the Soviet Union. Maria, I think there's more of this to come, isn't there? Because there's only 3. If not, then not. There they are. Okay, there they are. There is Sasha again, bottom. As for these maidens here, these girls, I don't know who they were, nor what the war did to them. On the right, the insert and enlargement of Dad in water up to his neck is an image Mom kept by her bedside for the 30 years she outlived him. The little girl was my oldest surviving cousin, Michelin, born 2 years after the death of our grandfather, Michal. She was born Michalina in Poland in 1935. She survived the war with her parents in the Soviet Union. In post-war Paris, Michalina became Michelin. In Montreal, she remained Michelin. I had no relationship with my oldest surviving cousin, though I recall being a flower girl at her wedding. As is evident in this photograph, Micheline was the only member of the second generation who knew a grandmother, though today she would be categorized not as second generation, but as a child survivor. She also knew our uncle Mietek, who is seated there, and must have known Aunt Zelda and Yurik too. Every cousin born after Micheline would be born in a different country, beginning with Misha, who became Michael, born in Siberia in 1944, and ending with another Michael, born in Montreal in 1958. We've seen images of the last Michael in the earlier segment. He's my brother. Aha, here's Mietek again. This was Sarah and Mihal's eldest son, Mietek. He started medical school but never graduated. Upon mobilization in 1939, Mietek was recruited as a first lieutenant. He was not murdered for being Jewish. On April 10th, 1940, a week into the systematic slaughter of Polish officers, Mietek became one of the estimated 22,000 murdered by the Russians at Katyn. During the night, he would have been handcuffed, led to a basement, and thrown into a cell insulated with sandbags and a heavy felt-lined door. Then he would have been forced to his knees. Before blasting a bullet through the back of his skull, his executioner would have ripped off Mietek's wristwatch, if he was still wearing one. My brother Michael keeps this photograph on a bookshelf in the basement of his home. Michael went to medical school. Unlike his uncle Mietek, Michael was able to graduate. Oh, yes. Sabina was a fellow refugee Abram met in Soviet-occupied Poland. It is my understanding that they were the same age. I never knew Sabina's last name. I never thought to ask. Sabina and Abram fell in love, gave themselves to each other, and promised to marry. When the Germans invaded in June of 41, Abram pleaded with his lover to escape with him. In stark contrast to Yurik, Sabina refused, because to do so would be to abandon her parents. Sabina never left her parents. In the same manner as Yurik, she was murdered with them. Dad never mentioned Sabina to me. He never spoke her name. But we knew who she was and what she meant to him, because he carried these photographs in his wallet all his life. After Dad died, Mom removed Sabina's images, 2 of them, from his wallet and placed them in a family album. After Mom died, I donated copies to Yad Vashem, and they are also printed in the book we are launching today. This document is self-explanatory. During a 3-day roundup on August 24th, 25th, and 26th, Sasha's husband tried to save Sarah Leah by hiding her in the town's Jewish hospital. The Germans entered the hospital and machine-gunned to death everyone in it. Patients, doctors, nurses, maintenance staff, every living creature they could find. Abram never knew the details of his mother's murder and warned those who did not to tell him. Until my brother found the image of the younger Sarah Leah, the photo on this document was all we had. Abram kept a copy in his wallet. He never lit a yahrzeit lamp, nor acknowledged a death anniversary in any other way. But on the back of this photo, lodged in his wallet, he wrote in pencil, Matka, August 24th, 25th, 26th, 42. Oh, yeah. When I was a teenager, one afternoon after school, I was picking up the mail when I retrieved an airmail envelope from Israel, whose heavy weight indicated that it contained more than a letter. I called my mom at work and asked permission to open the envelope. Permission was granted. Inside, there was a long letter written in Polish and a photograph fell out. There were 4 children in this photograph. Based on the way they were dressed, I deduced this photo was taken in the 1920s. Since the letter was written in Polish, I couldn't read it. Who were these children? Studying them closely, I recognized Uncle Mojżesz first. After that, it was easy. The beautiful doe-eyed girl was his unidentical twin Sesha. The tall boy standing in the back with his hands on the shoulders of the twins, and a defiant little imp standing in front with his hands clutching a hoop, had the same face. Now, it had always seemed to me that my father and his eldest surviving brother looked like before and after pictures of a bad diet. Of course, the beautiful little boy glaring into the camera with a look that said, "Bring it on," was my dad. I imagine this was the same mischievous imp who, on Friday evenings in synagogue, would crawl under the long communal table where the elders were praying and surreptitiously tie together the fringes of their prayer shawls, so that when they stood up to daven, they would stumble and tumble together. Dad didn't seem to care about the discovery of this photograph, so Mom gave it to Sesha without making copies. Years later, I chastised her for it. Attempting to defend herself, Mom wailed, "I didn't need a picture, I had him." I didn't need a picture, I had him.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Pamela. We will now open to questions. Sometimes people are a little shy. We're going to give them the time to type. In the meantime, I will ask Sharon, what do you think it means or would have meant to your father for this to be part of Jewish Heritage Month?
Oh, I think, oh, I'm not quite sure what he would say, but for me, it's just so perfect. He died in 1983. He did not identify himself as a Holocaust survivor because he believed that others, especially my mother, had suffered much more, but obviously he was. He considered himself a proud Jew and a Zionist before it became a dirty word. So for him, for this to come under the rubric of Jewish Heritage Month is absolutely impeccable. I hope he would be proud and happy. Like I said, I think he'd have mixed emotions, like, what do you want from me? You know, like, I don't know. But I think, yeah, he wouldn't object, let's put it that way. And it fits him perfectly. Because he was all of it. The Holocaust was like, don't look back, look forward, plant trees in Israel, look forward. That was him. That's why the book about my mother is about memory, but the book about my dad is about legacy. They were flip sides of the same coin. No questions?
No, we have a shy audience today, but I guess we gave them a lot to think about. So if people would like to reach out at any point and ask questions, Pam, Sharon, what are the ways that they could reach you, either through your publisher or?
Yes, I mean, I have a website. My website is www.pamkeeble.com, and that's the easiest way to contact me.
I think the best way to contact me would be through this library.
It's the Cote-Saint-Luc, Eleanor London Public Library. Well, Sharon, you do write for some websites with your short stories, so they could potentially contact you there. So that's, I guess, if people are not going to ask any questions, that's the end of our program for today. So do go and pick up the book, Daddy's Remains by Sharon Zajdman, where books are sold, also available on Amazon, but also borrowable, hopefully at your local library. If your local library doesn't have it, request it so that they purchase it, please. So thank you so, so much for joining us. Thank you, Pam, for joining us from across the ocean. And thank you, Sharon, for this moving and heartfelt discussion.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.